I'm so pleased to have our speakers here tonight, and I look forward to introducing them to you. But for those of you that weren't with us last month, I wanted to just give you the framework for this series a bit. As you may know, the word philanthropy is from the Latin philanthropia, meaning love for humanity. And here at Mandel, this is very close to our heart because that is the work of our faculty, our staff, and our students, sharing that love for humanity in a variety of ways through our work and our practice. And what's the germ for this series really came from this broader sense that philanthropy is often a mystery to many of us who work in the social and broader nonprofit sectors. And so we're trying to demystify the world of philanthropy a bit in this series. I want to thank Ms. Gail Schlenk, who is here with us tonight, who gave some of that great energy and support to get this series off the ground. Thank you again, Gail. So I want to introduce our speakers, and before I do that, I want to give you one little preface to the discussion tonight. Our framing for tonight's discussion is around going from program operator to program officer and thinking about the key role that program officers play in the philanthropic sphere, that sounds dangerous, sphere. And in particular, we want to give attention to the importance of the training and experience in nonprofit work that can be brought to bear on the dialogue between philanthropy and potential grantees and current and existing grantees. So I wanted to just give us all the same framework for thinking about the role of program officers. As you know, philanthropic foundations are they themselves nonprofit entities with their own missions. For example, MacArthur Foundation's mission is to support creative people and effective institutions committed to, and wait for it, building a more just, verdant, and peaceful world. So how does a foundation execute its mission? Well, practically speaking, this is done through its board and through its grant-making staff who engage with other partners and the grantees to undertake the work. Program officers in foundations are the front lines of interacting with potential and current grantees in specific program areas. These individuals manage portfolios of investments that the foundation has. They work closely with the board through both responsive grant making and strategic grant making initiatives that the board may have undertaken. So I wanted to give this image for you. One author has described a program officer as having three roles. One is eyes and ears, and that is spending time in the community, developing relationships, doing the kind of informational calls with potential grantees, kind of having their ear to the ground. The second, brain and heart. This role is kind of determining if applicants and potential applicants fit within the mission and strategy of their employer, the foundation, and making sure that grantees have the capacity to execute what they are proposing. So there's a huge communication aspect, both to grantees and upward to board for program officers. And then the third one is hands and feet. So here, program officers are asked to serve as ambassadors for grantees in the community, both to the board in terms of clarifying what grantees are doing and what they're about, but also in the community on behalf of the foundation and potentially the grantees. So I don't want everybody to think tonight is about that we should all go out and get grant-making jobs, right? That we'll all go out and become foundation officers. Estimates place the number of program officers in U.S. private, community, and public foundations at under 2,000. So these are relatively rare, and that's just in staffed foundations. There are many other grant-making entities that have no staff, all volunteer. So that's the framework for thinking about who sits before us. And now let me introduce you to our two speakers tonight. Christy Manning is going lead off tonight. Christy is a Senior Program Officer for Resilient Families at St. Luke's Foundation of Cleveland. Prior to her time at St. Luke's, she was the Director of Programs for Family Connections of Northeast Ohio. She's also been with the Greater Cleveland Family Support Consortium, Kids Health 2020. She was at Metro Health in their Center for Community Health. She's been with CASE, and she's worked with the YWCA, so she's had many roles on the practice side. She holds an MSSA from the Mandel School and a bachelor's degree in psychology from the University of Michigan, and I have to mention that she was a visiting student in social psychology at the London School of Economics as well. So that's Christy, and she'll be our first guest. And then I'd like to introduce Shila Kadar, who is the Program Director for Economic Development at the Cleveland Foundation. And she'll tell you about her role there, but I want to mention that she, in her previous career life, was the Director of Business Attraction for Team NEO here in Northeast Ohio, and worked on identifying and securing business opportunities for the region and creating jobs. Shilpa has her M&O from the Mandel School and has done postgraduate work at the Sam Lalit Institute of Management Studies and has a BA in Business Studies from Delhi University. And Shilpa is also very involved as a partner of Cleveland Social Venture Partners and has worked extensively through them and as a board member with that nonprofit. So with that, I'm going to get out of the way and ask Christy to come up, and then the format is each of them will speak a bit, and then we'll take questions from the audience, and then I should mention that we have a light reception just afterwards right outside the door here. So I hope you'll stay and maybe ask other questions that you didn't get to ask. With that, Christy?
Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to thank Rob for inviting me to step outside my comfort zone and come and talk to you today. Public speaking is one of the skill sets that I'm still working on, so I'll just acknowledge that up front. But this was an interesting opportunity for me to sort of think back, over a number of years and back to grad school, and I see one of my former professors sitting here, John Yankee, whose class I remember fondly. And actually, as Rob said, kind of tell you a little bit that I hope will help sort of demystify philanthropy for you in a way that I wish someone had done for me before I got into this position. So I'm bringing that perspective to this. So as Rob said, I am Senior Program Officer for our Resilient Families Strategy Program area at the St. Luke's Foundation. For those of you who are not familiar with the St. Luke's Foundation, I just want to tell you a little bit about it. On the lower right-hand corner of the slide there, you'll see a picture of the former medical center. So St. Luke's Foundation is a hospital conversion foundation, one of several here in Cleveland that all were established around the same time. The foundation was established in 1997 after the sale of the medical center to a for-profit hospital. And the proceeds from that sale, a portion of the proceeds, went into forming the foundation at that time. And I'm happy to say that we, as of about a year ago, now live back at the old medical center. For those of you who have driven by when it was boarded up, it is no longer boarded up. It is a very happy place that houses us and a number of nonprofits, including a school and an early childhood center, and two wings of the building house mixed income senior housing. So we've been very happy to come back to the neighborhood and sort of contribute to the rebirth of the former medical facility. So, as I said, the foundation was established in 1997, and based on its history, on the history of having been a hospital, the focus early on, related to sort of health and well-being, and also to a continuing commitment to the neighborhoods that surround the old medical center, which the hospital served, and quite frankly, a lot of the people that lived in the neighborhood were the employees at the hospital as well. So there was an ongoing commitment to those neighborhoods. So that's the early history. Now, when the foundation was coming up on its first decade, there was a desire to kind of look back and see what had been accomplished with the investments and activities in the first 10 years. And that led to a desire to have a greater ability looking forward to understand how our work was or was not contributing to sort of moving the needle in terms of solving problems and making the community a better, healthier place. And so that led to a decision to focus more on a strategic approach to our work. Just 2.5 years ago, the board approved 3 new particular strategy areas, which are indicated across the bottom here. So healthy people, which in some ways continues that commitment to health and well-being, albeit in a more focused fashion. So the 2 prongs of that strategy relate to promoting healthcare that's patient-centered and to reducing obesity. Strong communities really is the continuation of that commitment to the neighborhoods surrounding the former medical center. So that strategy really focuses on improving social conditions, improving physical environments, and promoting healthy community design in the neighborhood surrounding the former hospital. And resilient families really is kind of the new kid on the block. So that represented sort of a new focus for the foundation and came out of a desire to address what was perceived as kind of a gap. And within resilient families, we are really looking at strengthening families across kind of multiple contexts. So in the broader community, we're looking to support efforts that sort of elevate the conversation around the benefit of a family-centered approach. The second context being sort of social services and service systems, and looking to support efforts that serve to kind of integrate services and resources, again, with that family-centered approach. And then finally, the final context is really the parent themselves. As the leader in their family, we're looking to support efforts that strengthen them in their primary roles as nurturer, educator, and provider. So that's a quick overview of our strategies. So Rob asked us to sort of share information about our career trajectory to coming into a career in philanthropy, and sort of talk a little bit about what coursework and what other past experiences had supported us both in our prior roles as practitioners, but also now in philanthropy. So in an effort to kind of make myself into a case study for this program, I looked back over my resume in a way I hadn't in a while, and tried to identify some specific threads that I could call out today. So as Rob rattled off, some of the things I've done in the past, and as I looked at my resume, I've worked in a lot of different areas of social work, and I've had positions in multiple sectors. So I've worked in small nonprofits, and I've worked in large nonprofits. I've worked in the public sector, and then I've worked here at Case in academia in several different departments. I'm just going to take a walk through my resume with you and sort of talk about some of these sort of key points and reflections. So before I came to grad school, I worked on a demonstration project with dually diagnosed adults. That was my first sort of real job out of college. And that was the first of many, many, many grant-funded positions that forced me and gave me the opportunity to move from one area of social work into another just about every few years, interestingly enough. So I bring to my role now sort of an appreciation for how grant funding has that sort of an impact on folks that work in the nonprofit sector. That job really fueled my interest in a desire to understand what made for an effective program, and what were the conditions that supported kind of positive change. At that point, I was really looking sort of at the lives of individuals, but then, over time became more and more interested in sort of how that played into what made systems effective in serving folks. And I took that into my position with the YWCA that came after that. So that initial position came to an end because of the end of grant funding. And I moved on to another grant-funded position that was a time-limited position funded by the Cleveland Foundation, actually, where I was working at the YWCA developing kind of evaluation tools and processes for their teen pregnancy and domestic violence programs. Another great opportunity to sort of dig a little bit deeper into what made for an effective program and really how to monitor and learn from that over time. When that grant came to an end, I found myself unemployed for a short period of time, which really was part of the impetus for me to apply to grad school, because I thought if I keep jumping from grant-funded program to grant-funded program, it's going to be a tiring journey. And so it was my hope that a master's degree would give me some more options for something a little bit more stable. But it was also an opportunity for me to dig deeper into understanding what made for effective programs and effective conditions for change. And I'll say that I really went from looking at what made for an effective program or a project at that point to looking more and appreciating more what made for an effective organization and an effective system and then effective collaborations between organizations and systems, and really looking at the interplay between those things, which I think is something that's really served me well since, and particularly in philanthropy at this point. So I came to MSAS through the intensive semester program, going to school on the weekends in what used to be called the macro tract, which I guess now is the community practice. Rob has shared with me for social change concentration, and again, looking at sort of that interplay between programs and organizations and what made for effective interplay of those things. That's really something that I think has paid off, because when I'm talking with somebody about a program concept that they have or a project that they are interested in getting funded, I'm excited to hear about good ideas and new concepts, but I'm also then able to ask questions that relate sort of to the organizational capacity to sort of follow those through, which is a key consideration and something that we look a lot at. And I often reflect back on some of the things that I learned in grad school. I can truly say that a lot of the class projects I did sort of related to the development of a project within the context of an organization, or a hypothetical organization, and how that developed and changed and became more effective over time, and then how to tell the story of that. So I don't believe that when I was in grad school I had any coursework specifically on communications and marketing, but when I look back, I think that's been a lot of the skill set that I learned in grad school that has really served me well, just based on feedback from different professors, who would ask questions and say, this isn't really clear, what do you mean by that? And recognizing that storytelling aspect is really significant, not only in terms of getting funding, but also, I've come to appreciate increasingly over time, in terms of attracting and recruiting participants for programs, in terms of helping people within organizations understand what the other is doing, in looking at what makes systems function effectively. So that has to do with writing skills, speaking skills, which, as I said, I'm still working on. and also the story that's told by numbers. So I specifically think back on a regular basis to one of my professors who sort of made the point that your budget, when you're building a budget for a project or an organization, that budget should really tell the story, reinforce the story that you're setting forth, and that's something that I reflect on regularly when I'm looking at a budget that comes in with a proposal, because that budget tells a story about the organization's values, their strengths, and their challenges. You can tell, where an organization's values lie by where they're putting their money, and it also tells you a story about some of the challenges that they might be facing. Getting back to this question of. An organization has a really great project idea, but do they have the wherewithal then to implement it and to expand it and to scale it and to reach the people that they mean to reach? All of those sort of capacity elements are something that you can see reflected in a budget if it's built effectively. So that is one lesson I've come away with and really used over time. And I would say when I came out of grad school, some of the communication focus is something that I continued to cultivate and reflect on over time. So after I graduated, I actually left child psychiatry and moved to a position at Metro Health, managing a program that the Title V Child and Family Health Services program that since has moved its home to the Board of Health. But I came into that at a time where we were working to transition into a different focus from primary health provision to sort of a public health model. And I came in just at the point of beginning to develop a new proposal with that new focus for a new competitive 5-year cycle. Again, sort of the communication piece came into play. And there was a real emphasis at that time as well in shifting from Metro as the sort of sole recipient of funds to sharing the funds with others in the community. So collaboration was a really key consideration, and understanding sort of how to communicate with collaborative partners and how to get those partners to share their stories with one another became sort of part of my journey. And many of those partners were members of an advisory board that I staffed to help drive that development, which is probably the first real board-like group that I was responsible for chairing. And I don't recall that I had specific coursework in that, but I know that also is one of the areas that the coursework now focuses on. So I was pleased to see that. So I'm going to cut to the chase in the interest of time. I ended my pre-philanthropy career with a series of different roles at what's now known as Family Connections. I say now known as because it was the product of a merger that happened sort of towards the end of my tenure there. And as Rob said, my last role there was Director of Programs, where I wore many, many hats, from program evaluation and marketing to cultivating collaborations to, again, grant writing, recurring theme for me. And that's actually how I ended up at St. Luke's. I knew that the St. Luke's Foundation was developing these 3 new strategy areas, and I had good reason to believe that one of them was going to focus on families. So I had been monitoring the website for sort of evidence of that in the hopes that we would be able to apply at Family Connections and get some funding through this new strategy area. And one day when I was looking for that information, I came across the job posting for my current position. And I'll say I never had really considered pursuing, a position in philanthropy, but the new strategy felt like such a good fit with everything that I was sort of passionate about and interested in that I thought, oh, what the heck, I'll throw my hat in the ring. So that was a little over 2 years ago, and I've been learning a lot ever since that builds on all of that other experience. So the little the little figure scratching his head is sort of how I used to feel about philanthropy in many ways. As a grant seeker, I sort of felt the grant-seeking process mystifying. So it's been my hopes to sort of help demystify that in my regular interactions with people who are coming to find out about funding opportunities, to sort of break down what I would have said I perceived as sort of a black box. I wasn't always sure what made for a yes answer, what made for a no answer, and I often didn't feel very comfortable asking for clarification about that. Probably my own hang-up to a large degree, but I do what I can now to sort of make that, it's safe to sort of ask whatever questions. And I try to be sort of as transparent as possible about whether there is or isn't a fit of a project with our funding strategy. And if it turns out that there's not a good fit with our strategy, try to make it a useful interaction for the person I'm talking to anyways. Perhaps I can, give them some information about another funder that might be interested in what they're talking about. Or make an introduction to another organization that's doing similar work whom they could benefit from talking about. And I also find myself often in conversations with folks asking them lots and lots of questions that people would have asked me in years past, because I think it's helpful in terms of thinking out how to tell that story. And everything from, how are you going to approach recruitment, and, how do you intend to train your staff, to, who are your collaborators, and do you feel like you have the right staff, and do you feel you have the capacity to sort of measure your outcomes and understand where you might need to tweak the program over time. I guess the other thing I would say about that is I come into those conversations with an appreciation for the realities of working in a nonprofit. So I really don't want anybody submitting a proposal that doesn't have a high likelihood of being funded, because I appreciate that time and energy resources for most folks working on nonprofits are precious. So I do what I can to streamline that process. And I guess the other thing would be, I recognize that when you're in particularly a smaller nonprofit wearing many hats, you often don't have the opportunity that I now have in my position to sort of step back and look at things from sort of the 30,000-foot view. So I do what I can to sort of help provide the opportunity to reflect that, again, by sort of asking questions from that perspective. And again, sort of working to make connections where I can. And I guess the other thing I would say is, because I have an opportunity to talk to folks across a variety of areas and sectors, I know I'm talking to folks that don't always have a chance to talk to each other. So again, I'm looking for those connections I can help make, or even information about what somebody who's really focused on early childhood might want to learn about what's going on in kind of the job training field, because there often are some connections that could be made, but might not be on a regular basis, because just folks don't have the time to go outside of their area and talk to other folks that are working in other areas. So just to sort of summarize, because I think I've gone over time. I didn't see you tugging your tie, but. So hopefully I'm able to sort of share a different perspective with folks when I'm meeting. The other thing I would say about sort of that relationship of talking with grantees and partners is I rely heavily on those folks to keep me informed about what's going on, on the ground level in the trenches, because I recognize I'm no longer doing that part of the work. So I really do see it as a partnership, and I'm always welcome. I always welcome the opportunity to sort of learn more about ideas that people are exploring, new approaches people are taking, and what they're learning on the ground. And then hopefully share a different perspective and feedback on that can be helpful. So with that, I will end my comments.
Thank you. Okay, so let's let that steep. Now we're going to add Shilpa's story to this.
All right, good afternoon. Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you, Rob, for inviting us. It is so nice to be back on campus. And Christy, it's always a pleasure to be on a panel with you, so thank you. It's fun to do it again. So I am going to share with you my story in 5 slides. So I am your typical trailing spouse. Came to Cleveland from India about in 2002, and I was following my husband, who had come in here for a doctoral program at Weatherhead. And I had about 9 years of work experience, both in the nonprofit and the for-profit industry, and had a master's in management and an MBA from India. And I was quickly bored out of my skull. I was cooking and cleaning for my husband, and I was looking out from the window. As soon as I saw him walk in from Weatherhead, I was, making fresh food for him. And 6 months later, I found myself at the Mandel Center office begging for a scholarship so I could go back to school. And this was, of course, by the way, one of the worst. I mean, not the worst, but a pretty bad time in terms of the economy. I knew I was not going to get a job based on my Indian master's degree, and I needed a U.S. Education to be able to qualify for H-1B visas and green cards and so on. So I started in January of 2004, graduated in 2005, and if I may share an embarrassing story, Rob Fisher had nominated me for the Student of the Year award. This is before he knew that professors could not nominate students. Thankfully, a student had also nominated me, so I was, put into the mix. And so that was my entry into Cleveland and entry into the M&O program. And while, the theories of demand and supply curves didn't change from my MBA to the M&O, I learned so much in terms of the nuances of nonprofit management, and particularly around board governance, around ethics, around earned income, etc. So that I found very valuable. And then before I knew it, I was out in the field doing live strategic planning work and doing live evaluation projects. And I was literally drinking from the fire hose and absorbing everything that I could about life in America, about work culture in America. One of the strategies for learning the work culture, a professor in India had advised me, was go to school and do lots of internships. So my criteria for looking for an internship, I used to live on Hessler Street, literally behind this wall, 5 feet away, and I did not have a car. So my only criteria for an internship was I could either walk to it or I could take a bus to it, bus or a train. And in the search popped up Social Venture Partners, right down here on Magnolia Drive. And I started interning with them in my second semester here. And I was there as an intern and then as a coordinator, and I stayed with them for 3 semesters. So Social Venture Partners is an organized network of philanthropists who want to, in addition to giving their money, also want to give their time and talent to help build the capacity of nonprofit organizations. And in staffing the volunteer committees and doing and organizing information, typical tasks that an intern does, I probably sharpened my project management skills. But the most valuable thing I learned over there was the value of mentorship and the relationships that I built while I was there. Marcia Levine, who's in the audience, was one of the early partners that I got to know. And one of the relationships I built at SVP then later led to my first job. So before I get to that part of the story, I do want to share a distinct memory from my days as being the only warm body in the office at SVP. SVP was transitioning between 2 executive directors, so I was the coordinator and the only warm body in the office. And there was a voicemail from the Cleveland Foundation, from a program officer from the Cleveland Foundation. And I don't even remember what it was, but it was a simple clarification on some point, but it sent such a ripple of excitement and nervousness in all the partners and the board members that were actively involved in looking at, taking care of the organization. And so much of care was taken in terms of crafting a response to that simple query that it left a lasting impression on me that nonprofits do tend to put program officers on a pedestal. And now that I'm on the other side, now that I am at the Cleveland Foundation and in a philanthropic position, I am doing my best to be very mindful of that fact and try and break out of it and help my colleagues who are on the nonprofit side also, feel that and believe that and work with me as a true partner. So back to my storyline. This was the SVP slide, by the way, which is a network of SVP affiliates all the way from Bangalore to Boston. And there are some 700 plus individuals who are engaged in doing capacity building for nonprofits. So the SVP partner who had stepped in as an interim executive director while I was a coordinator then took on a full-time job at Team Neo. And as soon as she had a position open, budget for a position, I applied for the job. And 1 week out of school, I had a job at Team Neo. And Team Neo, for those of you who are not aware, is a business attraction and marketing organization. And basically, it's a lot of deal making, leading to projects such as this, your typical happy picture of groundbreaking. This, for me, was a huge development because not only did I get a job right out of college, I also got the commitment for processing my green card and my visa, as Professor Swad knows, is a huge challenge for international students. And so I have to say honestly, and there are 3 professors in the room, that most of what I learned in the M&O program was not helpful to me while I was at Team Neo. I was with Team Neo for 3.5 years, and I found that I knew so much about nonprofit management that I would actually get into trouble for butting my nose into things that I wasn't supposed to be involved with. I was there for deal making. That was my job, and people expected me to put all my time and energy in landing those deals so we could have more of those groundbreakings. So I had started first on the research side, then I'd done more of the business attraction deals. The helmet that you see there at the end is from a groundbreaking from Teletech. That was the largest project I worked on, Lorain County, 450 jobs for a call center. But very valuable to a city like Lorain and the people that were living there. So as my experience built up, I was handling more and more complex projects, more international projects. The last project I worked on at Team Neo was for a turbine manufacturing company that was headquartered in India. And I was working very closely at that time with the Cleveland Foundation because the Cleveland Foundation had stated interest in advanced energy industry and building a whole new economy for the Cleveland area. So I was working, pretty hand in hand with the Cleveland Foundation. And before I knew it, my name had been suggested for a program director position that was currently open. I was literally a wild card candidate thrown into the pool. They had gone through multiple rounds of interviews, and 3 had been shortlisted. And I was this last-minute wild card that had been thrown in. And many, many rounds of rigorous interviews, and I see at least one program officer from the Cleveland Foundation here who knows how rigorous these interviews get. And many rounds later, I found myself at the Cleveland Foundation, and I find myself receiving this recognition of service certificate, which was for 5 years of service, and that was a 1.5 years ago. So the Cleveland Foundation is a community foundation, meaning that the money is coming from individuals within the community. It is pooled in a common pool, and it is managed by the foundation staff. And then staff like me, program officers and program directors, work very closely with our board of directors to then make grants to nonprofits in the Cleveland area. We have an endowment of $2 billion, and we rank somewhere in the top 10 community foundations in the country. That the ranking keeps changing. And we do have the distinction, this nobody can take away from us, we have the distinction of being the first community foundation in the world, and we just celebrated our 100th anniversary last year. So my role as a program director there is very similar to the role that Rob described earlier. At the foundation, the term officer is used for staff that is dealing with requests from the community, meaning we are responding to needs of the community and responding to requests from the community. And program directors tend to handle fewer grant requests from the community, but their focus and their expertise is on key issues that have been identified by our board as priority areas. So for example, we currently have priority areas of public education reform and arts and neighborhoods and housing and Greater University Circle. We also have an initiative in youth development, and I lead the economic transformation or economic development priority. So directors tend to have some level of subject matter expertise in their specific area, and then they help the foundation develop a theory of change and help the foundation then implement the strategy in that area. Interestingly, none of our program officers and program directors have come from the foundation community. We have always consciously hired from the practitioner nonprofit community. And my boss, who's Dr. Robert Eckert, he gave me 3 words of wisdom on who is not a good program officer. So the first is somebody who tends to get into analysis paralysis and is constantly researching and constantly wants more information before being able to take a decision. So one of the hardest things that a program officer or director does is to actually go and make a judgment call, make a decision. And people who keep asking for information don't get anywhere. The other type of person who will be very uncomfortable in a program officer's role would be one who is unsettled by not being a subject matter expert in the topic. Because of 2 reasons. One, like Christy said, you are almost, while you're specializing in a broad area, you are moving from one topic to another. Particularly if you're a program officer at the Cleveland Foundation, you might be working on an environment-related grant request today, and you might be working on a child abuse grant the next day, or some community development-related grant the next day. And so you're never going to be able to be an expert in any field and go deep in any field. And there are people who are wired such that they would not be comfortable with that. And then the third category of people who would be a misfit in a program officer role are those that need to be very close to the action, who really need to be on the front lines, touching the children, impacting, seeing the children on a day-to-day basis, or truly working with, the homeless, or because you are distant, right? You are removed from. You might be working on those issues, but if you're on the philanthropy side, most of the time you're sitting in your office impacting policy, or you're working on system-wide change, and you're helping do a lot of things on that issue, but you're not touching and feeling the clients at that time. So more and more foundations today, both big and small, are needing skill sets that are similar to nonprofits. So as a program director, I am doing strategy development. I am doing program development. So now, today in this current job, I am using a lot of what I learned in the M&O program. Also, collaboration building. I am not only working with the St. Luke's Foundation and the George Gunn Foundation. I might find myself working with foundations from Youngstown and Warren and Ashtabula, and I'm working with the state a whole lot, and I'm working with national foundations, based in Detroit, based in DC, on a lot of joint priorities. And then also, foundations are now beginning to get into the business of fundraising themselves. So once you identify an initiative such as the Greater University Circle Initiative, or I'm working on a career technical, career-focused education initiative, we need funds. I mean, 2 weeks ago, we were writing a grant to the state. The money, could either come into the foundation for, redistribution, or we might be helping a nonprofit write the grant. But the skill sets that are needed as staff of the foundation are now beginning to look a whole lot like those of nonprofits. So to go back to the point about now, I am beginning to dip into what I learned in the M&O program. Board governance, I find myself using that a whole lot. I'm constantly evaluating nonprofits on the strengths of their boards or helping them build their capacity. So the board governance class, I forget exactly what it was called, but trusteeship. I mean, it had the deepest impact on me. Financial management, because you have to review the financials of any nonprofit that you are making a grant to. It's particularly important when you're looking at PRIs, program-related investments. Our foundation is beginning to do more and more of program-related investments, so I need to be able to understand the financial statements. I also need to understand earned income revenue, which was another class, and I forget what that was called, resource development. And that's very important because to assess whether the nonprofit can repay your loan, you have to understand how solid their program is and how solid their earned income revenue stream is going to be. Legal and ethical decision making. We are constantly having to make very hard decisions. Sometimes I think the philanthropic job is so much, is easy, it's cushy, but you are constantly making very hard decisions on what was the intent of the donor in making this, in endowing this money with us. What was the intent of our board in making this grant? How do you translate that? How do you interpret that and take decisions that you need to take on the ground as a program officer or program director? To echo Christy's point, I am constantly learning from the practitioners around me, and I see at least 2 nonprofits here who we are grantee partners with. I am never going to know what WireNet knows, for example, in terms of business expansion, right? I am never going to know what Cleveland Neighborhood Progress knows in terms of community development. I'm never going to have the depth and the breadth that is needed across entrepreneurship and technology commercialization and business expansion and business attraction and business retention and foreign direct investment, right? I mean, there are so many things just in economic development. There is no way I am going to know all of that. And then, of course, I rely very heavily on the practitioners for their experience with fundraising, right? So when you're applying for funding from the state, from federal governments, teaming up with our grantee nonprofits is incredibly helpful. And of course, like you said, high sensitivity to challenges of running a nonprofit, knowing that nonprofits can sometimes have trouble meeting payroll, and I've had to run around within the foundation trying to get checks cut earlier so that people don't go without their pays. And that sensitivity comes having been a practitioner at some point in time. So this last happy and very crowded slide is reflective of my life today. So the cornerstone, of course, is the Cleveland Foundation. I wake up every morning very excited to go to work. I work with peers who have brilliant minds, beautiful hearts, and are doing some very cutting-edge stuff. I have goosebumps right now. There is also this deep realization that if I do my job right, I can impact thousands of people, thousands of lives. Yes, I am no longer on the front lines. I'm not doing the deal-making type of work. I don't have people walking up to me and saying, thank you, I got my job at Teletech because of you. But I know that if I'm doing my job at the foundation right, I am, in the long run, creating a lot of jobs for people. Being at the foundation, being at any philanthropy is also a rare position where not only can you dream up crazy stuff that you think is right for the community, but you're also positioned to put your own resources towards it, go to your colleagues in the foundation community and say, hey, this is really important. This is a good thing that we could try together. And you can actually bring it to fruition. So that part, I think, is very exciting and rewarding. So that corner is my day life. I take the same theme of philanthropy into my evenings and weekends. I have continued to stay very engaged with social venture partners. I have gone from an intern to being a partner to being a board member. And last week or 3 weeks ago, I stepped in as the vice president of the board. And I am so excited because this is such a small but incredibly impactful organization with some amazing people. You can see pictures, and Marcia, I think I can see you there in the red. And so the other pictures are just to say I do a lot of very fun things as well. I got to walk in the opening day parade at the Gay Games, which was sponsored by the Cleveland Foundation. I gave, on my personal front, gave a bar mitzvah style performance last August for an Indian classical art form that I have been learning since I was a child. I should have done this when I was 14, 15 years of age. I did it at the tender age of 43, which was fun. And I have now signed up to be a celebrity dancer for the annual benefit of Groundworks, which is, please take out your phones. It's on April 25th in the evening at the Convention Center, and raising money for Groundworks educational programs. So on that happy note, back to you.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much. So we'll rename this panel the Accidental Program Officer. Sounds like neither of you planned this necessarily, but the stars aligned to put you in these positions. Shilpa, I also have to say that I think a number of us in the audience cringed when you said the line about, I didn't use anything that the M&O taught me in that job, and I just wish there hadn't been such a long gap before you then, but I'm using it now. So that's a relief. Well, we'd like to get some questions going. You've heard about really these two vignettes, these two trajectories into the philanthropic sectors, and some nice reflections on some of the skills that have been particularly useful, and maybe some things for us as we think about ourselves on the grant asking side of the table, how we should maybe interact a little differently than we have in the past. How I don't think we ever can completely demystify what goes on in the C-suites or wherever you all get to sit, but I think you've helped us see you in not only because you're colleagues, but you've explained how you come to be in these places. So I'd like to just open it up and see what kind of questions or comments folks would like to share. Maybe you could say your name, Jeffrey.
Hi, Jeffrey Bowen, M&O class of '98. I found it really interesting that Christy, you talked about making it safe to ask questions, and you just talked to us at length about learning from practitioners. Both, I think, very healthy and really nice to hear from two major foundation representatives. But we're also here to hear from practitioners who moved into the C section, or the C seats, if you will. If you could comment on either or both of you, do you think that the foundations themselves, that the culture of these venerable institutions are starting to change, that making it safe to ask questions, making it safe to talk about our foibles and the things that we don't know, or the things that we don't necessarily do well, is becoming more acceptable? Or is there still a certain culture that makes us afraid of you relative to the way the organizations work internally?
Anybody want to take a stab?
So I guess I would say, because I've heard other people say it and it strikes me as true, that if you know one foundation, you know one foundation. So I would would hate to say that the way we're oriented at the St. Luke's Foundation, because that truly is part of our culture, is we want to learn from and we want an honest dialogue with the folks in the trenches. But I would hate to think that I might set some of you up for a bad outcome by suggesting that that's true across the board, and not that it may not be true with many foundations. I just don't know that to be a fact. So, you know, and I guess reflecting on my my time on the practitioner end of the equation, you know, one foundation can be very different from another, and there really are different cultures and different approaches, and so I think that's the culture of St. Luke's Foundation, but I can't speak for all. I do know from some of my colleagues in philanthropy that it strikes me that there is an interest in that kind of open, honest dialogue from some of the others, but I can't say for sure across the board. So I don't know if you want to.
I mean, I would completely echo that. There's also an increasing realization that if you truly want to impact change on the ground, you're going to have to stay and work with your grantee for an extended period of time. And that is pushing both sides to have more of a peer-to-peer relationship as much as is possible. So I think that is happening. And I also think that, you know, some foundations are beginning to put into place practices where they have fellows that are coming in, fresh blood coming in. I know that at our foundation, we have a policy that all program officers come in for a very defined term. And that is so that we always have practitioners coming into the organization, and we always have people moving out from the program officer role, which kind of, you know, gets away from the older thing of, hey, I'm not getting funded because the program officer doesn't like me. And, you know, so organizations are beginning to put those practices in place. But like Christy said, when you know a foundation, you know only one foundation.
Just to piggyback off of that point too, I think you make a good point about wanting to see impact. I think that is a growing trend across foundations, and the reality is that as you want to know up front if there are challenges to achieving something. I'd much rather have a conversation with somebody on the front end about the reality that that they're lacking a particular resource. And frequently I will ask those questions, like, you have a great concept, but when I look at what resources you have available in-house, for instance, for evaluation or for staff training, I wonder if you think you'll really be able to achieve what you're setting out. And I'd rather have that conversation on the front end, because perhaps we can provide additional resources for that. And that's sometimes the conversation we have. Or sometimes it's, would you consider collaborating with, agency X over here who has some of that capacity? And that could be a real win for all of us. But also along the lines of not, if you can be honest up front and recognize ahead of time what those challenges might be, and that nothing is a sure slam dunk, then on the other hand, we all learn from what happens, even if it doesn't work out the way we all wanted it to work out, because that kind of learning is important for all of us. And in the long run, we all need to understand what works and what doesn't work. And sometimes things don't work, but we can learn from that. So having that open, honest dialogue, at the point of making a grant, and then throughout the grant, like, this isn't going so well, there might be a need for a course change, or we might need to say, you know what, this isn't working, so we're not going to do this anymore. But I'd much rather have that conversation than get to the end and realize it didn't work, but we're gonna pretend like it worked as well as we thought it was, because then we all miss out on that opportunity to really kind of learn from that.
Goldie?
My experience has been, I don't read that out. Video needs to
It's
be
for the
short.
audio.
Oh, okay. My experience has been that it depends on the program officer. Not the culture, the program officer.
And as a former program officer for many years, you can say that. All right, other comments? Maria?
Hi, I'm Maria Domingo. I'm a M&O graduate from 2014 and got into the philanthropy nonprofit side kind of late in life, spent 20 years in the corporate world. And I wrote something that you had said about the Cleveland Foundation about how solid is their revenue stream. And I've lived in Cleveland for 7 years, and I've seen that sometimes the foundation, as others, fund programs that don't really have a strong revenue model. And I wondered how you pick and choose those. In particular, I can mention maybe the local food initiative or the wind power initiative, where it's pretty clear that they're just getting ramped up. But how do you balance that, knowing that that revenue stream issue is out of the gate, not really there?
Right. So there are some areas where you know that there will be zero revenue, right? So when you're feeding the hungry and you're clothing the poor, there is going to be no revenue. And then there are certain projects on the other end of the spectrum in helping existing businesses expand their businesses and become more profitable and diversify their product line and so on. There is the potential of some earned income revenue. And that's what we have to understand and figure out with the help of the nonprofit, because they understand their clientele way better than I would, but understand at what point can there be enough demonstrable value so that the nonprofit can start charging some fee for service or some kind of success fee that they can start earning that allows them to either reduce their need for funding, for grant funding, or can help pay back a program-related investment. So it does vary on what need in the community you're trying to fulfill and what kind of development timeline is needed. For offshore wind, for example, the development timeline is going to be really, really long, right? So.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Smith. I'm a National Urban Fellow candidate for our Master's in Public Administration. And my one question to either of you is, once you got to the role of program director or program officer, what's the one thing that surprised you?
I can answer that. Yeah. I was surprised by how smart I got practically overnight. Yeah, all of a sudden, people were listening to everything I had to say very carefully, and to a point where I realized I had to be really careful of what I said, because I didn't want to sort of send anybody off along the wrong path. And
Your jokes are a lot funnier, too.
yes, yeah, most definitely. Yeah, so that continues to surprise me every day.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm going to echo that in some ways. The number of friend requests I suddenly started to get. And remember, I was an immigrant, and I don't exactly look like the typical Clevelander, in the business community, in the economic development, or in the philanthropic space. And most people would see right through me, right? Walk by me without even a hello. And suddenly all of that started to change. And that was, it was very uncomfortable at first. I mean, it still is sometimes, but getting used to it now.
Other comments or questions? Yes, Gable.
You referred to the role of trustees with organizations. And looking at it pragmatically, trustees are often sought by an organization for the financial support. But from your perspective, what roles do you see the trustees playing? And is there in the eons ago, there was training done by organizations for trustees. I'm not sure for what a trustee is to be and to do. So sort of a two-pronged question.
Start first. Sure. Yeah, sure. So trustees play an incredibly important role. We see many organizations come to the foundation that are in complete crises not just because the executive director has left or isn't a strong executive director, but because the board hasn't been paying attention, or the board is there because they were friends of the executive director and not necessarily had the range of skill sets that are needed on a good board. And very often we've had to say no to funding a very important organization in crisis, because the message going back to them with the no is, you really need to strengthen your board, you really need to shake things up. Sometimes there are factions on the board, and the recommendation would be to go get help from, this is jet lag stepping in, what's the organization that helps with board governance? BVU. Business Volunteers Unlimited, or some other consultants, to get help to strengthen their board before the organization can come to us for crisis bridge support. So, do you want to expand on that?
Yeah. Yeah, and we have that conversation oftentimes as well. Yeah, and it, the tip-off sometimes is that that there aren't adequate financial resources, or that, again, that story that the budget tells, that there's a real imbalance about sort of where resources are being put, which speaks to the values of the organization. And it's very telling as well, for instance, when we go to site visit an organization that's applying for a proposal, if the board president or a board member is there, and sort of, are they speaking the same language? Are they speaking in sync with the staff that are there? That's very telling as well of, sort of a cohesive leadership for the organization. Yeah.
And we've seen a lot of that even from my social venture partners hat on. When we engage with a nonprofit organization to help with capacity building of the organization, the application typically comes in with, we need help with our IT systems, or we need help with developing fundraising, systems, putting fundraising systems into place. But when you actually start working with an organization, in some cases we've had to first pay attention to the health of the board itself. In terms of getting the right mix of people, getting the right culture, getting the board to work in cohesion, getting the board and staff to be on the same page on some critical issues. So you have capacity building organizations like SVP who do that kind of work. You have Business Volunteers Unlimited that does that kind of work, and a whole host of other consultants, private consultants.
All right, I think we're to the close here, and my one thought as you all were talking, I was jotting down some different sub-job titles that seem to apply to you all. I've got gatekeeper, bouncer, counselor, investigator, midwife, gambler, to a lesser extent.
Gambler, yeah.
So you're asked to do a lot. And I can't thank you enough for helping us see a little bit behind the veil tonight with your personal stories and sharing from a friend's perspective with us in this venue. So can we say thank you to our guests? Please join us outside for a brief reception and a chance to talk to Christy and Shilpa. Thank you all for coming.